All right. Oh my gosh. I'm so happy to be on the next stream. Welcome to the Secure the Bag Book Club live broadcast, or if you're tuning in later, welcome to the broadcast period. We keep it up, every week. We keep up the live feed for you to go back and review, and if you can't make it live. So I'm excited for that. So I'm excited for you to be here. Welcome. This is the Secure the Bag Book Club. I am Brooke Brown. This is where it's a beginner-friendly, just conversation as we kind of add a foundation of preparation, right, to acquire assets. The book that we are reading this month is entitled The Art of Buying Art by Alan Bamberger. And I'm excited for this broadcast. Hello, because the chapters, let me tell you the chapters that we're covering today in this broadcast. We're talking about provenance, which was a new term for me, and I'll explain that in just a bit. We're talking about, we're just going to skim through art and damage and forgeries and fakes because, frankly, those chapters are a little dense, and I don't think that we want to get into talking about getting that kind of play going on. I think we want to just kind of position ourselves to be like, oh yeah, everyone's on the up and up, So I think we'll skim past those chapters unless people come on the broadcast and are like, oh, I really wanted to kind of touch base on that chapter. But there's that. But here's the good stuff. Here's the stuff that we were like, yeah, this is the reason why we picked up this book, right? Because it is the Secure the Bag Book Club. And we are talking about, in part 4 of the book, the economics of art, an introduction. Chapter 20, more facts about art and money. And then 21, evaluate the asking price. That's what we're going to get into. Welcome, those who are participating live. Go ahead and shout yourself out in the chat. Really appreciate you being here. So without further ado, let's get into it because I feel like I just have a lot to say and a lot to ask you guys about. So if you're watching the broadcast later, please do not feel afraid to leave a comment under the video, under the stream video, and let us know, what you're thinking, questions that you have, whether you've picked up the book, is this an interesting topic for you, all that good stuff. Okay? All right. So the first chapter, which that we covered from this past week, is chapter 16, Provenance is Profit. Okay? So let's talk about first, what is provenance? And if my glasses look a little skewed, it's because I sat on them, and so I got to figure out how to get them to not be crooked. So I don't know. Ignore the glasses. Okay? Anywho, so it talks about provenance being facts not obvious from simply viewing the art, viewing other examples of that artist's work, or researching the artist. This information is called provenance and includes printed, verbal, or other forms of data relating specifically to that work of art's ownership history. And this is on page 201, and it has a bulleted list of, things that would be considered good provenance, right? So things like an exhibition or gallery sticker attached to the art, a sales receipt, images of the art online, letters or papers discussing the art, name of previous owners, a mention in an art book or a exhibition catalog, and on it goes, right? This is my thing. Okay, this is what immediately came to mind when I was listening to the chapter about provenance and reading the chapter about provenance. Which, by the way, if you want the audiobook version of the book that we're reading and the past books that we've been reading, go to the description of this in this video. It has the link to the Spotify playlist where all the audiobooks are there for your convenience. We will continue to add to it as we read other books. Okay, so provenance, right? In my mind, I was thinking that provenance is basically like a politician with pedigree. Hear me out, okay? So how when a politician comes on the scene, especially one that's like a blue blood, where their family was politicians, and his granddaddy was a governor, his other one was a senator, his mom was on the board of such and such. Anyways, all those kinds of things, right? So with art, pedigree matters too, right? The nature of the context in which the art was created, the education and experience of the artist, who had the art in his possession beforehand and stuff. So like, in my mind, I'm thinking like that's like the pedigree of a politician, right? Where it's like, oh, he went to this Ivy League school and he was in this line of work until he decided to have a career in politics, and then his family happened to be in politics. I mean, okay, I know we have like polarizing views of Donald Trump, but think about how, as he was, kind of running for office and things like that, he used his pedigree, right? Oh, this is who my father was. This is the billions of dollars I've created in value for my businesses, and this is who I know, and this is who I'm rubbing elbows with, and this is the TV show I've been on. And all that kind of stuff played into the celebrity of it all. So provenance is like the celebrity factor of the art that you're looking to buy. So let me know in the chat if that like made sense, and if that like analogy helped you understand provenance a little better. That personally helped me figure it out too, because it was a new term for me. I did not know that, and I really appreciate the fact that the books that we're reading kind of expose that vocabulary, that jargon that you're going to want to need when you're talking to experts, when you're talking to people in the industry, when you're talking to the art community and whatnot. They know these things, and when you don't use the terminology that they know, it makes you look green. It makes you look like a beginner. It makes you look like a novice. And the point of us like learning in these books about how to acquire these assets is that we are familiarizing ourselves with how to talk about it, how to value it, how to seal the deal, and how to eventually grow the value of it and protect it in your portfolio of assets, right? Awesome. Hello, all who are joining us. I saw a couple of more people join us. So we're talking about provenance in the chapter. Provenance is profit. So another thing that I wanted to talk about with provenance is, in the chapter about provenance, they did talk about, on page 209, they talked about being aware that sometimes people that are in the business of buying and selling art can simply overlook certain significant details, right? Because they've never been asked. So ask, right? And it talked about all these questions that you can ask about in your provenance gathering mission, right? So things like, do you know anything about when, where, why, or how the art was created? Where did you purchase this art? Do you know anyone else who can tell me more about the art? And so on and so forth. And I don't want to get into the full list, but that is what it talked about. And I thought that was lovely preparation for when you go in to think about the value of the art that you're getting, and just the interesting backstory, because I think that's one of the fun parts about buying art, especially as an asset. In chapter 17, it talked about art and damage, which I was kind of relieved to find out that sometimes a little bit of damage adds character to the art and is not necessarily a deal breaker. So there's that. And it also talked about forgers, fakes, and scams, which I was like, okay, bet. So, when I go out and I look for art, that's going to be something that I consider is like, is this the real deal, right? But I didn't want to go too much into that on the stream, because I just felt like we needed to get to brass tacks, which is starting in chapter 19, the economics of art. And we're like, oh yeah, this is where we start, right? So interesting enough, he starts the chapter with this section of the liquidity of art, right? That chapter was sobering. I don't know about y'all, but for me, it was like, oh man, put a wet blanket on the deal. Because it said selling art takes time, sometimes months, sometimes years, and that's longer than many people who want quick cash are able to wait. Now, mind you, I don't think any of us were ever like, oh, we wanted to buy some art so that we can like sell it really quickly to turn a profit. Like, No, I think the point of collecting art is to beautify your space. It is to have interesting conversations with people who, And then secondary is also it should be, worth something to you and potentially to others, right? Caitlin in the chat said Banksy piece that was destroyed by a hidden shredder in the frame actually went up in value. Yes! So she's talking about the artist Banksy, who is a well-known, very popular street artist. He does a lot of like very polarizing, I don't know about controversial, but very like polarizing street art. It usually makes it comforts the downtrodden and makes the well-off kind of uncomfortable, and it's kind of social commentary. And anyways, one of the things that he likes to do is to create street art that can potentially be destroyed. So when she's talking, Caitlin in the chat is talking about the Banksy piece that got destroyed with a hidden shredder. I say hidden because clearly the artist was like, I gotcha. It went up in value because it was like, oh, this is a part of the theater of it all. And later in this section of the book, it does talk about like, how some art is valued based off of the eccentricity of the artists themselves, right? But I'm getting ahead of myself. So in the section about the liquidity, it said you take your financial life into your hands when you invest non-discretionary capital in art with the idea that you can convert it back to cash at any given moment. That is a very important note to make. Side note, disclaimer, this is not investment advice, but it is something that we should, take a position on, which is that art is of all the assets that you could possibly make money off of. It is not a quick cash kind of commodity. And that is something that you should be mindful of. In the section, it talks about, the realities of, how long it could potentially take. So somewhere between, 2 to 8 months for a piece to sell at auction or in a gallery or, even online. So that is something that you have to be mindful of. Another thing that it said to be mindful of was that there are no formal laws, standards, or regulations that exist for pricing art. People selling art can price it as high or as low as they want, or for whatever reasons they want, and change their asking prices whenever they feel like changing them. That is another reality about buying and selling art. On page 261, this is something that is also kind of just in the logistics of it all, is the expectation about commissions. Commissions and fees, but mainly commissions. It talked about how if you're thinking about comparing to other kinds of assets, right? So for stocks and bonds, the commission for transacting with those rarely exceeds 2%. But when you think about selling real estate in the United States anyways, it can be 3 to 6%. But with art, paying a commission under 10%, either buying or selling, is rare. Some art sold at auction tends to have to command a commission of 15 to 35%. And art also tends to generally, I don't know what this says, but basically it's saying that selling art takes about 15 to 35%, and buying art at auction tends to take between 10 and 20%. And through galleries, buying or selling art tends to take 20 to 60% of commission. So you do have to be mindful of the transactional cost when you're thinking about buying and selling art. But I think the payoff is still quite worth it, especially if you think you have a valuable piece on your hands. The next chapter, it talked about, in chapter 20, it talked more about art and money. There was a lovely example on page, what is this? It started on page 265, and Oh no, it started in 266. Okay, so it talked about do you guys remember the example of Bruce and Sharon? They're two artists, and they are of equal respect in the art community, right? And anyways, it goes on to talk about an example of how the difference between one artist having a very limited supply because they're at the end of their lives and don't have as much potential to create more art and have kind of done all that they can do, and then the artist that has more to offer, maybe it might be younger, and can flood the market with more pieces, right? And it ended up talking about the trade-off, right, of going with either one. There was no right or wrong, right? It just is what it is, right? When you think about supply and demand, when you think about like an artist who doesn't have as much art to make in later in their life and whatnot, then the supply in the art community shrinks, and therefore becomes more. The piece becomes rarer, and then you have the potential to to gain some money from that. But for the like older pieces, but for the other artists, the younger or the one that has more more in the tank, right? Those early pieces might be more valuable because they're their early pieces, right? And there's fanfare around that. So I thought that was a pretty good way of talking about the trade-offs, the pros and cons of going either way, with all that example of artists. And then also in the more facts about art and money chapter, and again, this is which chapter is this? Chapter 20. It does a phenomenal, oh my God, I was like, yes, that's it. Thank you for that example. The part where he talks about the speculative, it starts with examples of comparing certain types of art with an artist with certain types of stock categories, right? So the speculative growth stocks of the art world is the section that it starts talking about that. And it talks about like, the things that are riskier to invest in as far as the art world is concerned. And then it went on to talk about the aggressive growth stocks of the art world, and then the classic growth stocks of the art world. And anyways, really worth the time to sit down and read those sections. I think of all personally, I thought it was the best example in the book, period. But I mean, without having gone through the rest of the book, so far that one was the one that you really want to read. So anyways, read it, listen to it, and come back to this video. Let me know what you think about that example, because it really, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because I do want to keep these videos short, or digestible. We'll say digestible, but not necessarily short. One of the last things that it talked about was evaluating the asking price of art. And it went into detail. This is chapter 21, evaluate the asking price. And it talked about a couple of ways that you can go about, potentially figuring out if the price that you're trying to pay for a piece of art is actually worth it, or if you're getting kind of like screwed in the deal. And one of the things, a couple of the avenues that you could take is the seller. You can talk to the seller. You can talk to art auctions, or you can research art auctions. You can research online, or you can research resources that do not have conflicts of interest. And I thought that was a really good way to talk about doing your due diligence, right? And being able to research, being patient with yourself as you uncover the details that you're going to need when you go confidently into the deal of buying this art, right? And it talked about, where is it? Yeah, it talked about just in general, the way that the art community tends to value art, and also the things to be mindful of, which is if someone has a conflict of interest, right? If they're a seller and they sell a specific type of art, then you don't go to them and be like, hey, do you think this type of art that you sell is worth it? Because of course they're going to say yes, because they want you to potentially buy from them, right? Same is true with the artist, right? If you go to the artist directly and say, hey, is your stuff really worth, $5,000? Well, the artist is going to say yes, because it's their work. They pride themselves on making it, and they need to be able to eat. So of course they're going to be like, yeah, of course it's worth $5,000. But if you go to, say, a university professor that that is well connected in the art community where you live, and you want to know, is this piece any good? You can potentially go to them, because they're not buying or selling the art. They just happen to be a scholar in the subject that you're in the subject matter that you're looking to do a deal with. So there you go. I think that translates well to other assets that we've talked about as well. When you think about intellectual property and stuff like that, if you were to go to a intellectual property lawyer, you ask certain questions. You figure out if it's worth it to, secure the bag, in that manner, right? So same is true with art. Okay, so that wraps up this section. We are almost through to the end. So we have chapter 22. Let me see, where's the table of contents? Chapter 22, which is negotiate the buy. 23, make the buy. 24, buying art at traditional auctions. 25, buying art at online auctions. And 26, building a quality art collection. And that's all the chapters we'll cover before we get into the appendix, which we won't actually cover in a broadcast. But next week, we're going to talk about those last remaining chapters up until chapter 26. And the appendix, if you got the physical copy, really good resource there, because it has a lot of notations and just advice that isn't covered in the book, but is still valuable. Okay, so really happy that you all joined me this evening. And for those that are watching later, I love that you're here. I do. Thank you for coming and enjoying this stream with me, and let me know in the comments what you're thinking about when it comes to acquiring assets of any kind, actually, because we're going to be thinking about, I'm going to be thinking about what book we're going to talk about next month. I actually would love your opinion in the comments if you want to talk about things like tax strategies, estate planning, all those wonderful things. And because the reality of this broadcast is that we are looking to prepare ourselves for a potential financial, win, a windfall or something like that. And we want to be ready for when the cash comes so that we can secure the bag. All right. Well, thank you so much. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye.